República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Welcome, Venezuelan University and Teaching Community, to the English as a Foreign Language National Training Program, coordinated by Dra Rosa López de D'Amico, National Tutor of this training area.
Welcome to the National Training Program for Teachers of English. This is Module 1, English Language Teaching Approaches and Methods, and this is the presentation of lesson number 1. It is a great pleasure to be part of this experience, and I hope you enjoy. The program is part of your Continued Professional Development, CPD, and in this module, we are developing an awareness and understanding of how approaches and methods in ELT have changed. So, the objectives. By the end of lesson 1, each one of you will have reflected on your own experience of learning English at school. It means going back to our school years. You will have compared the difference between an approach and a method in English language teaching. You will have named some approaches, methods that you have heard about or used. You will have reflected on grammar translation and the reasons why it was developed. You will have reviewed the grammar translation assumptions and methods. And finally, you will have reflected on how and when you can use this approach in a modern class. Okay? So, now let's think about the difference between an approach and a method. Over decades, there has been many different approaches and methods in teaching English. In the 6th lesson of this Module 1, we will look at some of them more closely, but first, let's look at our own language learning experience, okay? So, think about your teenage years. Did you enjoy learning English at school? And I mean at high school, at secondary school. Why? Why not? Think about that. So, did all your teachers teach in the same way? Can you recall who those teachers were and how did they used to teach? What about what sort of activities did you do? Can you think about that? You could write them in your journal. So, what specific things do you remember from your experience? And look at this image. So, how much speaking activities did you do? How much writing? How much reading? How much listening? I'm just referring here to the 4 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So again, did you have lots of speaking, for example? Or what about listening, reading, writing? So think about your experience in high school. And did you study a lot of grammar? Do you still remember the rules? Because this is one of the first things sometimes we think about when we used to study English in secondary school. Okay, and our last questions. Was the experience fun? Do you remember your English class in a nice way, in a positive way? Was it communicative? Just think, reflect on that. So now let's get on the difference between an approach and a method in English language teaching. So we often use the same words, or we also often use this approach and method like they are the same word when we talk about ELT in mother teaching. So, but let's see what else it is, okay? So, what do you think is the difference between an approach and a method? The first component of an approach is that it's the theory of a language. The second component of an approach is that it's the theory of learning the language. And now, a method, the first component of a method is that it's the procedures to follow to learn in a specific way. And the second component of a method is that it has an overall plan for the presentation of the language material. Now, the difference is the approach covers the theory and the method is the practical steps. Okay? Now, let's read the following statements and let's think about which one refers to approach and which one refers to method. The nature of English or the language to be learned. The particular skills to be taught. How knowledge of English is acquired. The roles of the teacher and learner. The appropriate procedures and techniques. The conditions that help language acquisition. The content you are teaching. The order the content is presented to learners. Some of them refers to approach and others to methods. Let's see if you got the right answers. So, approach, the nature of English or the language to be learned. How knowledge of English is acquired. The roles of the teacher and learner. The conditions that help language acquisition. Now, let's look at method. The particular skills to be taught, the appropriate procedures and techniques, the content you are teaching, and the order the content is presented to learners, okay? So there you see, from the 8 initial ones, 4 belongs to approach and 4 belong to method, okay? So, we often use method and approach like they are the same word, and I repeat this because it's so common when we talk about English language teaching. But are there any approaches or methods you know already? Most probably, of course, you have used some of those, okay? Sometimes we are not aware, but it is important to know where we are because depending on the group and depending on the objective, we might use one more than the other. So, here is what we will look at in the lessons of this module. Are you familiar with them? So I'm referring to the whole module, okay? So, the grammar translation method, the natural approach, the direct method, the audiolingual method, humanistic approaches, and the communicative approach, okay? So, I'm quite sure you might be familiar with them, okay? And probably use one more than others. So, look at these pictures. You saw some pictures in your initial activity, okay? So, which one do you think belongs to grammar translation? Just give some thought to which one you think. And, well, letter D is more typical an example of grammar translation. So here we arrive to the second part of this presentation. So referring to grammar translation. So we are going to learn about grammar translation, its development, its principles and beliefs, methodology, its advantages and disadvantages. And you can make notes, but I'm quite sure you already have some of them because in the initial activity of this lesson, there was information about grammar translation. So we will check and we'll just review, okay, where did the grammar translation approach come from? What's the assumption behind grammar translation approach? What is the method in grammar translation? What are the advantages and disadvantages of grammar translation approach? And what are some activities you can use with the grammar translation approach? So we will have a look at this very briefly, okay? And we might think, and you might recall now, the readings you had in the first activity of lesson 1. So today we learn foreign languages. Mostly people do it for business or traveling. There might be other reasons, but this is mostly the ones people answer. So very few people, let's say back, used to travel 2 centuries ago. So very few people needed to know foreign languages. Do you remember what languages did people learn before 1900? And if you don't remember, here they are: Latin and Greek. Quite right. People learned Latin and Greek. Not everyone, of course. Only priests and rich students at private schools and universities learned these languages. Most children of poor family never went to school, or they only went for a few years and learned to read and to write. In fact, it was normal for children of farmers and workers to leave school at the age of 11 and work on the family farm or become an apprentice to learn a job. Okay? Now, when we think about grammar translation, remember, grammar translation believes that a language is a set of words organized by grammar rules. If you are good at vocabulary and good at grammar, we are good at the language, okay? So this is the assumption, this is the belief. Now, what can students do so they can learn vocabulary? And that's the question we all ask, how we can make them learn vocabulary. So here are some examples. Memorize lists of words, copy words and translation in their notebooks, copy words many times in a row to memorize spelling. They can also write the names of the month and repeat them many times, the days of the weeks, the numbers. Those are things like typical things they can do. Now, what can students do so they can become good at grammar? This is a question we all ask ourselves. So what can they do according to grammar translation? Well, to improve their grammar, students can memorize grammar rules, subject plus verb, and that's normally the way we used to work, or we used to do it. Some who are still working with grammar translation memorize words forms. For example, all forms of a verb. To go, went, gone. To eat, ate, eaten. To drink, drank, drunk. To eat, ate, eaten. To dance, danced, danced, for example. Transform sentences, for example, from present tense into past tense. I go to school, I went to school. From active voice into passive voice. From direct speech into indirect speech. The gut feels with the right grammar form, okay? So these are the most common we know. Now, a typical grammar translation class is normally where the teacher speaks most of the time. So I, the teacher, or you as a teacher, you speak most of the time and tell the students what to do. The tasks are very precise, and there is not much room for creativity. So now, which one of these features of grammar, which one of these are features of grammar translations? Okay, so work with literary text, pair work, movement, focus on accuracy, focus on grammar rules, high tolerance for mistakes, read, write, and translate a lot, games and songs. Which one do you think are the features of grammar translation? So let's check. Number 1, work with literary text. Number 4, focus on accuracy. Number 5, focus on grammar rules. And number 7, read, write, and translate a lot. These are the characteristics, these are the features of grammar translations. Now, the biggest disadvantage of grammar translation. Students learn a lot about the language, but they can't speak the language. But grammar translation is still very popular, so it must have advantages. Do you remember some of those advantages from your initial activity? Here you can check. So here's a list of features. Read through them and decide which are advantages and which are disadvantages. So if we think, for example, from the perspective of the teacher, so grammar translation lesson is easy to plan and prepare. Teachers can translate a text in advance and then teach it to the students. They can use dictionaries and grammar for help. The students won't know. In the classroom, teachers will be able to translate every word and explain every structure. A grammar translation lesson is risk-free. A teacher must only know the words and structures in a particular text. There is no danger that students will ask about words and structures that the teacher doesn't know. A grammar translation classroom is easy to manage. Only the teacher or one student speaks at a time. Students don't move around and don't speak to each other. The classroom is under the teacher's control all the time. Okay? Now let's look at some disadvantages. It can be boring for the students. Students don't learn to speak the language. It doesn't encourage communication and cooperation. It's too teacher-centered. And there's not much room for creativity. So this approach has some advantages for the teachers, and it is really easy to teach. But it has many disadvantages for the students, as they don't really learn to speak the target language. Do you think we can use it as a main approach in our classrooms in secondary schools? So now reflect and go back to our initial activity in this lesson. Did you learn English with grammar translation? Yes or no? Perhaps a combination? Perhaps a bit of grammar translation? The other question, how do you feel about the grammar translation approach? And as I said, it has advantages and disadvantages, but it all depends on the context you will be working with. Now we have to think about which is our context, whether it is good or not, or if there are some techniques, some aspects, some elements from grammar translation, some features that we can use, okay? So now, thank you very much for listening this the main presentation of lesson 1. And now I invite you to continue with the other activities of this lesson. You have a second video from Professor Plata, so very quick review of the experience of teaching English in secondary school. And afterwards, you have reflection and you have your evaluation. Thank you.